people that work in this plant here.
For a year and a half, I didn't have anything.
We lost our home, we lost a vehicle.
Where you sit today used to be a General Motors plant, and now there are over 1,000 employees working here.
Is this a union shop?
It is our desire to not be.
Doing the same thing over and over again, that wears on your body and your soul.
很佩服美国呢，还能上两班倒，不用像我们想象那样子去为了生活失去很多东西。
A look at the new award-winning Netflix documentary, American Factory. It's the first documentary produced by Barack and Michelle Obama's production company, Higher Ground, as part of their production partnership with Netflix. And here's what President Obama told the filmmakers about the story's importance to America's changing economy.
We all have a sacred story in us, right? A story that gives us meaning and purpose and how we organize our lives. If you know someone, if you talk to them face to face, if you can forge a connection, you may not agree with them on everything, but there's some common ground to be found and you can move forward together. We want people to be able to get outside of themselves and experience and understand the lives of somebody else, which is what a good story does. It helps all of us feel some sort of solidarity with each other.
And joining us now, Oscar-nominated director, producer, and cinematographer behind the documentary American Factory, Julia Reichert. Good to have you. So, want to hear a lot about the documentary and what folks are going to see. But first, explain the connection and the involvement that the Obamas have. What did they do to put this together?
Well, actually, they saw the film at just around the time of the Sundance Film Festival. So the film was totally finished already. But they, could do kind of whatever they want. And they picked our film out of probably many that they saw to be their first release on their new company, Higher Ground.
So let's talk about the story, Julia. 2008, December 23rd, 2008, this factory shuts down. 2,400 people on the spot lose their job, benefits and everything that comes with it. What happens from there?
Our town was Dayton, Ohio, which is where I live also. Our town was really devastated, as were many towns throughout the Midwest and South of the U.S. People not only lost their jobs, but they lost their homes, they lost their cars. People were living in the streets, living in their cars. There were suicides. I mean, it really devastated our town. And we wondered, it was frightening, and we wondered, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen to us? And if you fast forward about 7 or 8 years, we all read in the news that General Motors plant, right, which had been abandoned by General Motors, was bought. And there was going to be manufacturing again and jobs again in Dayton. But then it turned out the person who bought it was a Chinese billionaire entrepreneur, and he was going to bring over hundreds of Chinese supervisors and workers to work with blue-collar Americans. And we could see from our vantage point there in Dayton that this was going to be a really unusual and important story. So we had the opportunity to get in there for 3 years and follow that.
So what happened to the 2,400 workers? How many of them were then rehired, as was promised that manufacturing was coming back?
Actually a lot of GM workers went back to work there, and then also some younger workers. And at first there was a lot of curiosity about working with Chinese people. It was kind of fun. The Chinese, let's not forget, were folks who came over from their small city in China, flew over and landed in Dayton, Ohio, and had to set up a new life there, right? So here they are on the shop floor together, and sometimes, the language barrier is huge, and sometimes it's really funny to see what happens, and sometimes the sort of management style that the Chinese folks brought over and the sort of proud blue-collar Americans, there was collision, and it became difficult at times. The wages in particular were much lower. People talk about, they used to make about, say, $30 an hour at the General Motors plant, and now they're making 12.
Wow.
Almost 10 years later. the same people.
Today they're making $12 an hour.
Now they're making 14, 15. Some who've been there a while make 18. Wages have gone up. It's a hard job, though. Factory work is hard.
You know, Judy, this story, one element of this story is like almost a universal, and it's about loss. And that loss is restricted in large part to certain specific areas of this country, not on either coast. Dayton, Midwestern states, parts of the South. And in addition to the economic loss that many of these people sustained in 2008, 2009, many of them are the same people whose families go and fight the wars that we've been involved with for 18 or 19 years. And I'm wondering, the people you encountered, the people whose stories are encompassed in this documentary and others, how do they feel about the fact that seemingly so few public people know how to address their loss?
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up, because to me, the battle for the heart and soul of America is taking place in the Midwest, is taking place in the heartland of our country, is taking place in places like Dayton, Ohio, is taking place. That struggle for who wins the heart and soul of Americans. Although I will say, I was driving here at 7 a.m. this morning, coming to the show, and I thought about, wow, the shift is about to begin at the factory. And I see people here rushing to work with their backpacks on, some of them in jeans, some of them in suits. But we're all working people. We all work for a living, and we all want many of the same things. We want a sense of security about our lives. We want a sense that we'll be fairly treated at work. We want a sense that we have a future. We have an economic future that's secure. And I honestly feel, where I come from, that future is not secure. I mean, we all talk about the American dream. Maybe that's partly what you're alluding to. And the film does touch on that. Can the American dream still live in the heartland of America? And I think our film really raises that question. What has happened to workers' rights on the job? I mean, whether you're here in New York City or a big city, or whether you're in the Midwest, the rights of workers, the dignity of working people, your sense of sort of agency at the job, that you have something to say about the conditions of your work, those are all very important questions. And all of that came up sort of naturally through our making this film in that one factory. It's just one factory, although we do go to China and we see what work life is like in a city in China too, and that's turns out to be pretty different and interesting.
All right.
The documentary American Factory premieres worldwide on Netflix today. Julia Reichert, thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Julia.
And it's time now for Business Before the Bell. Despite the economic uncertainty as the Trump administration considers steps to boost the economy, the American consumer appears to still be strong, with a number of companies exceeding earnings expectations. Joining us now, CNBC's Dominic Chu, break down the latest results for us, Dom.
All right, so Mika, the two biggest corporate stories of the morning so far are Target and Lowe's, because both of them posted better than expected profit sales. They also forecast better results for the rest of the year. Target was helped along by things like more customers trying in-store pickups, also online ordering and same-day shipping. And Lowe's was helped by better demand from the spring season, seasonal holiday sales. And it's an important look because we look towards whether or not the consumer can really continue to be the crux of that decade-long economic expansion in America. Remember, some estimates have the consumer spending side of things making up around 70% of U.S. gross domestic product. So it might be a big topic in that ongoing debate about whether a recession actually comes or not. One other place we are seeing some economic impact in America is on the job front, specifically for women in the workplace. 2019 could be the first time that women will make up the majority of America's college-educated labor force. That's according to the Wall Street Journal, citing research from, among others, the Economic Policy Institute, also Georgetown University, and others. Since around 2013, female share of college-educated workers has been around 49%. Now, this development may lead to changes in the way that employers recruit and retain skilled talent and workers, especially for women. And then sci-fi movie fans, you can rejoice. How about another chapter to the Matrix trilogy? That other chapter has now been greenlit by studios Warner Brothers and, yes, right, Village Roadshow Pictures. I loved it. Can you believe it was 1999 that first movie came out? That movie was written and directed, of course, by the Wachowskis.
I want to stop right there and say something to my viewers. First of all, what they're discussing towards what went on in 2008 is in fact true towards the bubble burst that happened here in America. But the fact of the matter is that administration, which was the 43rd President of the United States, the Bush administration, fared more towards the rich than it did the working class. And now we're seeing the repercussions of that towards the wealthy and the powerful. The conglomerates are strong, but the general public, the mid-class, is still suffering tremendously. David, my brother, commented on how that affected his life. It turned his life totally upside down to the point that he was used to making $14, $15, as much as $17 and $18 an hour around here in the factories, to where now all of a sudden he was back down to almost minimum wage, barely making $10, $11, $12 an hour working for McLean Power. That's the reason why the guy was having to work 60 hours a week on his feet, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. That helped once more to bring that much more anxiety into his life that caused a premature death, in addition to all the other aggravation that was going on in the community whenever I come back in 2014. Okay? But one of the other things that I want to discuss is that James Adams, I believe it was, in the early 1800s, come riding into the White House on a horse discussing equal fair rights pertaining to religion, the freedom of religion. No one knew that we was going to be inundated by all these occults and all these occult members over here in America, to the point that now we've got as much, or if not more, people that worship under the heading of Satan than they do worshiping under the heading of the Lord Jesus Christ of Nazareth. That's the reason why that there's been so much anti-Semitism and hate towards the Jewish people, not only here in America, but throughout the world. Because the anti-Semitism has risen throughout the world towards hating anybody that's associated with the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ of Nazareth. It's sad. It's really, really sad what our politicians allowed to happen here in America by basically selling us out and allowing for all the jobs to go south. The jobs wound up intimidating Mexico, South America, Hong Kong, China, Japan, all these other places, while we struggled, while we was basically sucking hind tit over here in America, that has put us where we are now today, towards a very precarious situation. Inevitably, our politicians have failed us, as well as the church industry that should have kept its eye open towards not allowing for this to have occurred. And now the swifting of the movement of the hands, now it has occurred right up underneath the majority of all of our eyes. That is what has put us where we are now. The Obamas, I think, believe it or not, are trying to do the right thing towards opening up the people's eyes and understanding where we was. And you know, it was Obama that brought his platform in on change. He knew that things was fixing to change. He didn't know in what direction that they was going to change. He didn't know how drastically that things was going to change, but he preached on the message of change. Of course, everybody made fun of him there at the last, because we went from having dollar bills in our hands to actually having nothing more than change. Because so many people lost their shirts, they lost their homes, they become homeless, they didn't have no life. It added that much more stress and anxiety into people's lives. that has driven people off into the drug culture and off into the underground dark movement. There has been a failure here pertaining to politicians taking their eye off the ball in not just Dayton, Ohio, and not just Flint, Michigan, but all over this country. Right here, where I'm at. If you're not associated somehow or another with the agriculture community, odds are you're probably suffering tremendously unless you're driving pretty good distances to be able to work at a factory. And once more, once you work at this factory, you're not going to be making the $14, $16, $17, $18 an hour that was happening before 2008. Now you're going to be down on the scale of $11, $12, $13 an hour, depending upon how long you've been there and who you are, depending upon how much money that you're actually making. It's really, really sad that the political parties of not just this state, but throughout this country, has allowed for this to happen. And of course, anytime the economy goes bad, the bar industry, the tavern industry, the nightclub industry, the drug industry always goes up. Always goes up every time, because people start singing the blues. This is where we are today. This is where we shouldn't have been if they would have done the right thing whenever 9 tapes wound up going to the White House in 1980 and 8. This is where we are today. In addition to the obscene obnoxiousness with guns and wanting to do all these heinous killings towards bringing that much more harshness and anguish into people's lives, terrorizing, domestic terrorism. This is where we are today. People that have lost their minds, they have lost their consciousness, they have lost their will to live. And once more, how did James Adams, or people like James Adams, ever even begin to fathom that our country would have been invaded by more evil than good, a people that was willing to be subjected to Ouija boards and all other kinds of demonic sorcery type activity? Who would have ever thought in the early 1800s, 200 years ago, putting us where we are now today, who would have ever thought that this country would have turned to the dark side more so to the light? They didn't think it, because if they did, they may have reevaluated the Constitution and said, well, the freedom of religion under these guidelines, under the guidelines that you're serving the righteous, holy, living God, and not some fictitious God pertaining to the Wiccans or some other crazy occult that has come into the neighborhood and basically destroyed the whole fabric and foundation of that in which what our ancestors originally bared and was willing to die for back 150, 200 years ago. This is where we are, folks. I wish that I could trim it up. I wish that I could disguise it. I wish that I could Joe Osteen it and sugarcoat it and make it all, wave a wand over it and make it all go away. But I know that I'm not going to be able to do that, because we did not get into this situation overnight, and odds are we're not going to be able to get out of this situation overnight. It's going to take some doings. It's going to take therapy. It's going to take prayer. It's going to take counsel. It's going to take people that's dedicated and passionate about building back their churches and their community in and around their churches to be able to turn this around. Good luck to all of us. I have said that before and I'll say it again because I don't play the partnership of the politics of rather not Republicans versus the Democrats or the Democrats versus the Republicans. I don't play that bias confrontational exchange, and that's another reason why that our democracy over here has failed, is because we put too much emphasis up onto the party more so than we have the government. It's kind of like your churches. A lot of people go to their churches not because they know that their churches ain't doing right or doing well, but they're devoted to that particular industry, that particular name brand, and come hell or high water, they're not gonna leave the First Baptist. They're not going to leave the Southern Baptist. They're not going to leave the Second Baptist. They're not going to leave the United Pentecostal. They're not going to leave certain brands that they've been associated with for the past 35, 40 years because they got too much pride. And of course, what does the Bible say about pride? It says that pride cometh before a fall. That's the reason why we felt like, David and I, that it was essential to build off of the Windmill Ministries of it being a non-denominational church more so than a denominational church, because so many people are following their denomination. They're not following their conscience. They're not following that in which what they see that is right. They're following what their ancestry was involved in. Oh, my grandmother and my grandfather, they was a hardcore Baptist, and I'm going to be a Baptist. Or they was a Church of Christ, and I'm going to remain a Church of Christ. In which some of those factors are good. But they just don't fit in today's society whenever you have so many wrongs that's exceeding over the rights. Thanks again. Good luck to all of us, and shalom. See you. Bye.